have a couple of distinguished guests who are here to help us celebrate. So first, let me introduce our featured guests. First, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, printer, inventor, scientist, statesman. Let's have a round of applause for Dr. Benjamin Franklin.
Thank you. Thank you. Good day to everyone.
And I'd also like to introduce Miss Dora Lewis, prominent Pennsylvania resident, member of the National Women's Party, suffragist, and advocate for the right to vote. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Miss Dora Lewis.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I do want to say Miss Frances Ellen Watkins Harper was also planning on joining us today. She unfortunately is detained and is not able to make an appearance. And we're also going to be joined by another figure who my notes only say he's the father of the Constitution. Not entirely sure who that might be, but he may be joining us up on screen. If anyone happens to know who that might be, we may see another visitor a little bit later. But let's begin by talking about the reason why we're all here celebrating the anniversary of the Constitution. So Ms. Lewis, why don't we start with you? Tell us about, first introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and also, what does the Constitution mean to you? We're all talking about the Constitution today. What does that mean to you?
Very important indeed, and I should introduce who I am. I am most certainly a Philadelphian. I am a suffragist, and that means that I am someone who supports the right to vote for women. Dora Kelly Lewis, I am also, can I say, the National Ratification Chair for the National Women's Party, and therefore pushing for the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution. I must admit, when you ask me what it means to me for the Constitution, it means that the Constitution needs more work. The Constitution is a living document, and I recognized over the course of time that we needed a change. Women could not vote. Now, anytime you want me to talk about why women couldn't vote, you just let me know, and I'll give them an understanding of that. But that's who I am.
I shall, absolutely. Thank you so much. And, oh my goodness, Mr. Madison, how are you today, sir?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You did not think you would have a discussion upon the Constitution and not invite the Virginians.
Of course not. Good day, Mr. Madison.
Good day, Dr. Franklin. A privilege to see you again. Good day, madam. Can you all hear me?
Can we all hear Mr. Madison?
Oh,
Excellent.
very good.
Please join me welcoming Mr. Madison as well. So, Mr. Madison, thank you so much for joining us. We're just beginning our discussion with students, visitors to the National Constitution Center. And our first question that we were posing, that I'm going to pose first to Dr. Franklin and then to yourself, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself, tell us a few lines about who you are. And we're here today because it's almost the anniversary of course, the Constitution. So I'm asking all of our panelists what the Constitution means to them. So I'm going to pose this question first to you, Dr. Franklin, and then to you, Mr. Madison.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Good day, friends. My name is Benjamin Franklin. I would introduce myself by my most recent assignment. I was a delegate to the Constitutional Convention after doing many things in my life. But the Constitution means to me well, I have people who thank me for my participation in the Constitution. They say, thank you for giving us a Constitution. Well, I say, you must be mistaken. That was not a gift. That was a job. I gave you a job. I helped to give you a job. The Constitution it's the outline of our form of government. But because we were many people, many men, I'm sorry, madam, but many men from different parts of the country with different ideas, we couldn't agree on everything. I was surprised we agreed on anything, to tell you the truth. But we knew, most of us knew, that we had to have this Constitution. And so we just had to swallow our ideas on something. So it is an imperfect document. We hoped that it would endure long enough to have the changes that it need. We hoped that the thinking about many things would evolve so that many things could be in that Constitution. But as it is, as my friend here said, a living document, and I wish that it has survived 237 years because we made it short and we made it possible to change. But it is still your job to keep it going.
Thank you, Dr. Franklin. Now, Mr. Madison, even though you're not in Philadelphia with us today, we do know that you've been here before, particularly in that summer of 1787. So can you talk to us about what the atmosphere was like in the city that summer, why we needed a constitution at the time, and what was it like during the Constitutional Convention?
I should be privileged to. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I will confess, though a Virginian all my life, I am no stranger to Philadelphia. I first traveled to your city in 1769 as a young man of 18, making my way to the College of New Jersey in Princeton, and would travel there several times leading up to the political business of 1787. Philadelphia left quite the impression upon me, and I will say I was taken by the free air of that province. A province which embraced those principles of fraternity, of liberty, of the Enlightenment. Now, I spent several years in Philadelphia as a member of the General Congress, and I witnessed over the course of that time the deficiency of our previous system of government, the Articles of Confederation. I will not go into great detail as to their failings, as well, we are not celebrating Article of Confederation Day. But what I will say was the greatest defect of the Articles of Confederation was that it treated the 13 former colonies as free and independent states, free and independent of each other. We were not one nation, but rather a league of nations united out of convenience, commerce, goodwill, and security. Now, there was a pervasive argument that that was enough to get us through the war. But when it comes to matters of government, should the end of government be that it is good enough? Or should we always aspire for something that is not perfect? I have often written that if men were angels, no system of government would be necessary, but rather a structure of government that, in the words of our preamble, was more perfect. Now, in 1786, we had tried to get a convention together to amend the Articles of Confederation and find some solution. We tried in Annapolis, Maryland, and it failed. And so in 1787, a new convention would be called in your city, in Philadelphia, in the same hall that gave us our Declaration of Independence 11 years prior. 12 states sent 55 delegates. The great majority of them under the presumption that they would be amending the Articles of Confederation. However, over the course of the previous years, I had labored in secret, studying all systems of government, ancient and modern, all the way from ancient Greece to today, to endeavor to determine how governments fail, what makes them succeed, and most importantly of all, can a federation of states across such a large geographic swath as North America exist as one nation? From this careful research, I began to create a new plan of government. This plan of government would be called the Virginia Plan and would be introduced in Philadelphia on the 29th day of May. Now, the deliberations, Dr. Franklin, you will well recall, were secret. We had nailed the windows shut of Freedom Hall, and none in Philadelphia knew just quite what those 55 gentlemen were doing in Freedom Hall. The labor was intensive, the debate extensive, and over the course of those proceedings in the summer, there were a great many instances where we thought not only the convention would fail, but with it, the Union. And therefore I say it is a miracle when on the 17th of September, a majority of 39 affixed their signature and hand to the Constitution and voted in its favor. I will say hereafter, once it became public what was accomplished, once the people were given news of this new structure of government, there was celebration all throughout the streets of Philadelphia. I will say Philadelphia has ever been a cradle of liberty, where a great many of those essential American questions were asked and, with the Constitution, answered.
All right, thank you, Mr. Madison. Now, for those of you who are here, and of course, we do want to leave some time for you all to ask questions among our guests here, so please let us know if you do have them. I have one more question that I'm going to pose to all of our guests, and then we'd love to hear from you. You may have noticed outside we have a giant wall with the text of the First Amendment. Now, can anyone, by any chance, name any of the freedoms that we might have in the First Amendment added to the Constitution? 5 significant freedoms. Freedom of, yes, go ahead.
Freedom
Freedom of speech, excellent. Any others? Yes, go ahead. Okay, the right to bear arms, that's in the Second Amendment, very good. Right, any others? Freedom of religion, that's in the First Amendment, excellent. All right, and one more, go ahead. Freedom of the press, okay. So talking specifically about the First Amendment, something over time, I'd like to turn this now over, we'll begin with you, Ms. Lewis. If we can talk about, and we'll sort of combine these two questions, what do you think is the significance of freedom of speech? And while we might be surprised that although there was a lot of debate about the Constitution in your time, and your time, Dr. Franklin, and your time, Mr. Madison, there is still debate about the Constitution today, all these years later. So the significance of freedom of speech, and also what advice would you have for everyone here who wants to talk about the Constitution?
All right, and I'm going to begin by having everyone notice that I am wearing a pin. Now, if you could see this pin up closely, you would see that what I am wearing is a jail gate. And that's because I have been jailed for freedom as a silent sentinel for picketing the White House for a woman's right to vote. Because that First Amendment has all those freedoms that you have mentioned, but there's also the freedom to petition, the freedom to assemble together. And that freedom was denied to us as suffragists. We needed to have our voices heard. I'm sorry, Mr. Madison, but you forgot the women when you made that Constitution. Dr. Franklin, you forgot the women. And therefore, we assembling together to have the voice of the women heard, and yet we were jailed. And that's why we wanted to be treated as political prisoners, and we were not. Instead, we were treated as common criminals. But our voices as silent sentinels, they might have been silent, but it was our banners, it was our presence as women that reminded everyone that America is not a democracy until everyone is treated equally. We as women are citizens, and we too deserve the right to vote. That 19th Amendment was a fight that we won, but only because of women. Women taking and claiming our rights, the rights found in the First Amendment of the Constitution. Thank you.
Huzzah.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Huzzah, yes. All right, Dr. Franklin will pose the same question to you. The significance of freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and tips that you might have for anyone today who wishes to discuss the Constitution.
Well, first of all, I feel duly chastised by you, Mrs.
I'm
Lewis.
glad to hear that.
Yes, and I wish we had had.
I mean, no disrespect.
Wish we had had you and women like you in the 18th century, because I do believe that just creating this Constitution did eventually empower people like you. Perhaps you thought that it meant you too, do you think? And that's a good thing. We didn't make that quite clear. And so certainly I will not be on this planet long enough to see the inception of a Bill of Rights, or as the Virginians were calling it, as they had, a Declaration of Rights. But that freedom of speech is essential. People have been jailed before this right, and in our mother country, England, for example, for criticizing the government, for speaking out against injustice. And I certainly think that if a country is to survive as a just country, then people must have the right to assemble, to speak what's on their minds. And so that's an honorable thing.
Thank you, Dr. Franklin. Mr. Madison will pose the same question to you. Your thoughts, was that part of the convention at all, talking about freedom of speech? Were there state constitutions that had such a right? And your own personal thoughts about tips for our guests today when talking about the Constitution?
I should be happy to speak upon it. Now, I will say, like Dr. Franklin, I consider myself thoroughly chastised upon this occasion, but will simultaneously say that I sit humbled upon this occasion. And I will say the capacity of the female mind for studies of the highest order can never be questioned. In my time and every time, demonstrating instances of genius, erudition, of science. I am pleased to see that that promise afforded by the United States Constitution and its Bill of Rights allowed for a people to rise and stand for those liberties which ought belong for all men. And to that, madam, I commend you. You sit as the example of how government ought work and be shaped. Now, when we speak to declarations of rights, it may surprise you to know, ladies and gentlemen, that I was not initially in favor of a Bill of Rights. There are several reasons. Now, in 1776, we declared all are created equal. We declared that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are the words.
We did say all men, though, Mr. Madison.
I beg your pardon?
We did say all men, did we not?
We did. Stay with me, Franklin. I'm going
Thank you, Dr. Franklin.
You're welcome.
But the various state governments all crafted declarations of rights for themselves. For instance, the Declaration of Rights for the Commonwealth of Virginia in 1776 was ratified on the 12th of June, putting forward those self-same sentiments, the equality of mankind, those natural rights of life, of liberty, of the pursuit of happiness. What do these various things mean? What makes something a natural right versus a civic right? Philosophers like John Locke, Montesquieu, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau all spoke about this. Natural rights are things that come simply by the merit of existence, things that come from God or by nature, and therefore cannot be infringed upon by any government. Natural rights are life, our liberty, our property, and the pursuit of happiness. From these natural rights, you get civic rights, rights that are made by governments and by society that can be molded to fit society, all to protect those three natural rights. Now, Dr. Franklin is correct. In 1776, we declared that all men are created equal, putting forward sentiments like Mrs. Adams. You, of course, know Mrs. Adams, Dr. Franklin, saying that we ought remember the ladies. Yet when we look to the language of our Constitution in 1787, did we say we, the men of the United States of America? Did we put forward that men can be congressmen? No, we utilized the word people, because we hoped that our government over time would change. Now, in 1776, we wrote these various declarations of rights. Did it stop people from infringing upon these various liberties? No. Madam, you said something that struck the very heart of why I found myself first involved in public service. Now, when I was a young man, I witnessed several people of my native county placed in jail, not for committing any criminal offense, but for simply speaking their opinion. I speak of the Baptists, which in the 1760s in Virginia faced a terrible prejudice, all because of a mere distinction and difference of opinion. And so from there, it sat one of the earliest compulsions to public service, to see man's mind be entirely unshackled. Now, in 1787, it was brought forward at the Constitutional Convention whether we should have a Bill of Rights within the document. Dr. Franklin, you can well recall, George Mason, of the Commonwealth of Virginia, said he would rather chop off his right arm than adopt this Constitution without a Bill of Rights. He said it would give great quiet to the people. It could be accomplished in an afternoon. Dr. Franklin, you know, politicians can't sign their names in an afternoon. And yet I was also fretful of this. There was a Southern interest at the Constitutional Convention that wished it guaranteed as a right to hold individuals in chattel bondage. I was apprehensive that if such a debate were to arise at the Constitutional Convention, that Southern interest would wish such an enumeration in a Bill of Rights. I was afraid that if we listed the various rights Americans were entitled to at this present moment, what should become of the infinite rights of human nature to be decided tomorrow and hereafter and after that? My theorem was that an enumeration that was not complete was not safe. Now, my mind would change upon it, and it became one of the greatest things I advocated for in the first Congress, the various amendment that would become our Bill of Rights. And of course, it begins with the First Amendment. And of course, what are those rights? The free exercise of religion, of assembly, of petition and protest. Where do these various civic rights come from? They come from that natural right of conscience. your ability to hold property in your opinion, to have your opinion be entirely your own, to be free and to be able to pursue the betterment of your mind. That is the greatest right, the right from which all other rights come from. The First Amendment is the security of that natural right. And so what advice could I give to people who are, in every instance, endeavoring to defend their mind and better it? To do just that, to enlighten yourself, to study not only our history for its successes, but also for its failings, for the instances where we declare that all are created equal, and yet still jail and withhold freedoms from some. In examining those lessons, we allow tomorrow to stand for the injuries done in their time and ensure that we craft a world where indeed all are created equal.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Madison. Now, I have no doubt that this conversation could continue all day. But it is now time to continue in our celebration of your work, Dr. Franklin, your work, Mr. Madison, and through the amendment process, your work, Ms. Lewis, by celebrating the Constitution's birthday with cake. So before we do that, everyone, please join me in giving a round of applause to Dr. Franklin, Mr. Madison, Ms. Lewis as well. Thank you all so much for being here today, and please continue to celebrate the anniversary of the Constitution with us. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Madison.
Thank you, my friends. Enjoy the cake. Do send some to Virginia if you can.
Thank you, sir.